Thank you very much for letting me present online. I know that it's already afternoon in Prague. It's quite early here in Richmond, but I'll try my best to be as active as I can be. And my topic is a bit different to the previous two presentations that I was able to listen to. As my main research area is partly related to regulation, but in this particular case, scientometrics. Now, Scientometrics can be summarized as the evaluation of knowledge production. And here I state a few problems that I found particularly interesting when working with algorithms. Um, Now, I do not have to introduce the problem of hot topics to you guys because I'm quite certain that all of the colleagues sitting there listening online are in some way, shape, or form working with algorithms, hybrid media, so on and so forth. What we do in scientometrics and in research evaluation is to see how this hot buzz really, especially in the social sciences, which is the most important one for me because I'm educated in that particular discipline or sets of discipline. How are they translated into publications, papers, conference proceedings, so on and so forth? There's a quite an enigmatic effect, which was introduced in Robert K. Merton in 1968, which states that very few authors are super successful in a particular field, in the social sciences mostly, but in other sciences too. And the other authors and other research will always be peripheral. This was supported by Mato Demeter as well in 2020. What I brought in this presentation is a paper that I'm working on, and I'm desperately needing co-authors for. So if you guys are any colleagues there are interested, please hit me up at the end of the presentation. And it's about how algorithmic bias and algorithmic influence gets translated into publications and academic knowledge production. The choice of this research is twofold. First of all, by education, by my first education, I'm a lawyer, and I work tremendous. I try to work as much as I can in practice on platform regulation, but I also have rather uh, sets of papers on online platform regulation, which kind of relates to algorithmic bias in a very substantial way. Second of all, and I think we share this experience with all of you, I've always felt like when we are reading these papers, there's an overrepresentation of a few countries and a few institutions. And I was not convinced that this has to be the case. And therefore, I try to introduce in the coming 12 minutes or 10 minutes an activist approach as to how to include more scholars in the discourse on algorithms that are not just from the Netherlands or Scotland or England or the UK. For this, I will lay out the key topics and gaps, as well as the trends with related to algorithms representation in the social sciences as a topic, where to publish papers if anyone is interested in developing her, and why collaboration and inclusivity is super important in this particular topic, which is a global phenomenon. And I feel quite uneasy about the fact that not a few countries or a lack of countries are heavily overrepresented in knowledge production, which is the case naturally in every other discipline. But in this particular case, I find it super problematic. For this, I will try, I created a specific search string on Scopus, the largest, and probably the most repository in the world, where I specifically focused on algorithms and algorithmic topics that I use the term algorithmic influence or algorithmic bias or impact. But these sets of key terms are the ones that I were looking for. You can see it's quite comprehensive, from filter bubbles to recommendation systems to regulation, decision making, so on and so forth. I will not. And I did a 10-year analysis, and then I used four programs: bibliometrics in R, decoding language R, Bossular site space, and naturally Python, which is probably the most important and matplotlib for visualization in scientometrics. I found 1,595 articles. I specifically scoped the research and articles because conference proceedings are usually peer-reviewed as articles. And I had three research questions. What are the dominant themes? How can we understand the global distribution of research on algorithmic bias? And what are the topics that peripheral countries can break into the conversation? And this is very close to my heart as well, because I'm from a peripheral country, namely Hungary. Yet when I'm in the US and I study and I do research here and study here for PhDs, I find it easier to break into certain topics than it was in a peripheral country. Now, the trends are quite evident, as you can see from the R roots and the CAGRs, the compound annual growth rate. Algorithmic bias is a super important, extremely trending topic in the social sciences. This trend rate is probably unprecedented from my scientometric research thus far. So there seems to be interest and unstoppable interest in the coming years in algorithmic influence, impact, and bias. However, and this is what I would call the make or break years coming, for all you colleagues who are working in this topic in any way, shape, or form, as you can see, the citations are falling drastically. Now, it's not very important for 2024 because it's quite hard to cite 2023 papers in 2025. But as you can see, the citations, the mean citation is falling rapidly, which means that there is an overproduction of research papers, which is quite an unfortunate turn in algorithmic bias knowledge production, because it seems to be that research is growing heavily. However, the interest is getting much more focused in a very few papers. So one has to be super concentrated as to what he or she or they are researching. Here I'll show the descriptive statistical analysis. As you can see, the last year, it's quite evident that the rates and the visibility and citability is falling rapidly. So I would suggest that the make or break years are coming, in the sense that the next 2 or 3 years, from my experience and from my scientometric evaluation research, will be crucial for those who want to break into this topic. Then I'll focus on topics. Here I use network analysis, and I made a rather big network of 1,467 nodes. I focused on the biggest set of nodes, so the biggest networks, and biggest network because the density was quite low. So it's quite a sparsely connected system. Yet I was able to identify quite a few topics that are extremely important and will be extremely important in the coming years. I try to visualize it in a more comprehensive way, and I will focus on the 10 biggest topics. This is probably the core or the center of my research paper that I'm preparing. And that's about the 10 topics that are the most important ones when it comes to algorithmic bias and influence and impact in the last 10 years. And these are the ones that will be, from my speculations and perception of my network analysis, will be important too. I'll try to color all the topics that are related to each other. What was extremely or exceedingly intriguing to me is how important and how significant regulation and regulatory topics are becoming, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. Now, this is naturally not a big revelation, as a DSA or the Digital Services Act, as well as the AI Act, is kind of dominating the media law and platforms. However, what was interesting to me is that these papers that are related to governance or regulation and policy are not solely concentrated to law journals. And this is quite a big step, because when these topics are transpiring into communication journals, media journals, we can see a democratization of a topic And this seems to be a topic that has the leverage of breaking into many, many sets and places in social science. Naturally, decision making in VR and AI bias and algorithmic fairness are still important topics. But again, regulation law is and will be, from my analysis, very important. I'll try to speed it up. Sorry. I also did a set of keywords analysis. It is a heat map of the most important keywords that in the last 10 years. Here are the two biggest sets of net social media. Here it's important to underline that certain social media research is still very dominating and still extremely overrepresented, especially echo chambers and filter bubbles. And natural artificial intelligence is and will be probably a hot topic in the coming years. Now, this is probably a more or less inspiring image. This is the set of countries that are collaborating on this topic. I excluded Russia because many journals are excluding Russia after the war. Now, as you can see, this is not in any way, shape, or form okay. The global north, or the United States, more specifically, and Western European countries are dominating this field, while entire continents are left out of this conversation. Though China has a growing interest and has some sort of collaboration, as you can see, it's still peripheral. And let's not talk about Central Asia or Eastern Europe, which are mostly left out of the conversation in relation to algorithmic bias and influence. These results that I've found were also, for me, quite unfortunate. As you can see, 98% of research is produced in the core countries that are visualized on the right side of the presentation. I'll invite all colleagues listening to this to find any countries that are not core or global north countries that are big nodes to do so, as there are none. And what was even more interesting is that 99.4% of our research referred to, that was at least mentioned 5 times in a paper, was from a global north institution. So this means that there is divided co-authorship, divided core and periphery seen in the algorithmic influence and bias, and which led to me to understand or to propose a few would be interesting to those who are not from a core institution, not from a core country, but want to publish meaningful and visible research on algorithmic influence and impact. Now, as you can see on the right side of this graph, these are the most important journals that are accepting and religiously publishing papers on algorithmic bias. Religiously is probably not the best word to use, but I want to accentuate these are systemically high quality papers with extremely high visibility. And I'm well aware of the fact that getting into new media and society, which the D1 journal is rather hard. Still, as you can see, these are core journals for my Bradford's Law analysis, which means that a very few journals are dominating the field and receive the most citations. So it would be advisable for those who are working from a peripheral country or try to find a venue under any of the above mentioned or journals that are presented in this graph and in this article theme. For topics, as you can see, interestingly, and this was quite intriguing, topics are becoming more and more concentrated. Many topics are becoming basic topics, and there are still a few niche themes such as algorithmic justice, digital criminology, and digital justice, which are close, as well as echo chambers that are still developing. Here comes ChatGPT-2, which will be also an important topic in the coming years per my analysis. But many topics are becoming basic or basic things, which means they become more generalized. And I will try to wrap it up. Some trends to consider. This was my trend analysis for the last 2 years, as well as a 10-year period. So filter bubbles and echo chambers are still a growing topic. for law, there is an extreme in the DSA platform regulation in AI. However, it's much more concentrated now than it was before. For example, Article 40 has become will be important for those working in law because they will be able to do empirical research on platform regulation as well. And naturally, marginalized topics related to sexuality, gender, and academia is still a five consideration to end this conversation. There's a lack of any sort of research in relation to non-Western environments and AI governance in the global South. So there is a huge gap to be filled, and I would be happy if it were to be filled by a U.S. scholar, because they probably don't understand the nuances of the global South as much as those who are working in this. There's a lack of research on long-term effects of algorithmic curation. Now, this invites empirical scholars to focus on that, and that's with particular attention to X and Twitter, which will be much more harder than it was before, thanks to the new policies. There is a growing interest, yet this is a peaking interest in political campaigning and disinformation and algorithms. And what is probably the most important for me, and was one of the most important findings, and I will end it here, was a lack of theoretical works. In the last 5 years, there was quite a lack of theoretical works that was highly visible. Many papers are still using theoretical works from 8, 7, and 6 years ago. So there might be a place for those who are not working with empirical legal research to break into these topics in a meaningful way. Thank you very much. And if anyone is interested in collaborating, I would be happy to work with any of you, and you can find my LinkedIn and my email below. Thank you very much.